So firstly, it's now 2:30, so we're going to kick off this afternoon's event. And I like to think of it as an event because it's a major occasion, and we've had almost 200 people sign up. Generally, as we do these things, we start to get the momentum as people come back after lunch, get comfortable on their sofa or on their desk, and look forward to what we have in store. So this is quite unique for Sales Confidence because we've partnered up with Freshworks, and for the first time, we're providing some deep, detailed insights provided by the Harvard Business Review. So I just want to give you a sense before we kick off officially and introduce our two main speakers, Jennie and Simon, how the day is going to play out this afternoon. So for the first, I'd say 25, 30 minutes, we're going to be having a discussion around the insights that we've garnered from interviewing over 300 global sales leaders. These insights will be added to the experience from Simon and Jennie, and they're going to be talking about their own experience of sales leaders and how they built out their sales organization. Do stay around at the end for Q&A and also for the networking. The fantastic thing about this platform, if you just look to the right, you can see that there's an area for networking. And at the end of our talk in 25, 30 minutes, we'll invite you all to come and share your feedback, ask more detailed questions one-to-one. And for many of us that have been stuck inside for months, it's a great way to interact with others out there. So hello, I'm just going to say hello, Nicole, hello, Richard, hello, Alex, hello, Benjamin. Keep letting us know that you're around, and let's kick off this presentation. This is an amazing, insightful report that we're going to be sharing around the link between sales happiness, performance, and technology. And this research was actually conducted earlier in the year by the Harvard Business Review by Freshworks. Now, Freshworks as a company based out of Chennai provides innovative customer engagement software for businesses of all sizes, making it easier for teams to acquire, close, and keep their customers happy. And Fresh Sales is their CRM, easy-to-use solution, which scales for all sales organizations. I'm really grateful today that we've got two experienced leaders. Simon Johnson is the sales leader representative of Freshworks, and Jennie Drimmer, head of enterprise sales, EMEA Coursera. Thanks for being here, guys. Thanks for having us.
Lovely to be here.
Oh, well, good. We're all excited. So what would be nice, Jennie, just to get a little bit of a sense of who you are, can you just give us a bit of some information about your background and also some insight into the structure of your sales team, so we've got a reference point as we go through this conversation?
Sure, absolutely. It's lovely to be here virtually in this new Zoom world, and to have a chance to connect with some of my peers, so other revenue leaders as well. Excuse me, hay fever. I've been a part of the Coursera business now since start of this year. Coursera, for those that do not know or have not used us, is an online platform for learning, linked with and driven by the leading universities and also enterprises around the world. So when you think about moving your skill base up, moving your team skill base up, we are sort of the go-to platform. And as context, since lockdown, we've gone from 40 million users on the Coursera platform to over 60 million. Wow. So I'm very fortunate to be leading the team at a very exciting and interesting time. I've spent at this point over 20 years developing teams across the enterprise space, spending a lot of my career at CEB, which is now part of Gartner, and then moving on to SaaS roles, both at OrgView, so in the org design space, and then time and attendance with HumanForce, PE-backed Australian business as well. So currently, the enterprise team here is about 10 individuals. Within the next quarter, we'll be growing to 15 as part of my remit, and we'll be growing further by end of year as well. So some interesting growth, and we'll talk about the impact on happiness of the team as well as part of that. Amazing. Thank you, Jennie. And what about yourself, Simon?
Good to meet you, everybody. Thanks for logging in. It's a privilege to talk today. So I'm Simon, and I'm the UK GM for Freshworks. So Freshworks is a very, very fast growing organization. In fact, it's the fastest growing privately held SaaS company in the world to date. I actually joined the organization about 6 years ago, entering a little bit of the unknown. It was a small organization, about 200 people at the time, and it's now somewhere around 3,500, maybe more employees across the globe. So having started from pretty much zero, we now have a very significant organization across the whole of Europe, 6 different offices and 200 or so members of staff. So it really has transformed from the startup mode that I began it to now a much more scale-up focused organization. And of course, the two environments are very different for leadership and for motivational skills around sales team, hence my interest in this session today. Other than that, I'm a very keen sportsman, so I'm an FA qualified coach, and I enjoy the crossover between business and sports management and performance. So hopefully we can also talk a little bit about that today.
Amazing. Looking forward to it. So to begin with, why should there be a focus on sales teams' happiness? And is a happy team a high-performing team? That's what we seek to understand with this report. I guess, though, just Jenny, why do you think this is an important topic? Why did you agree to get involved with this conversation?
Yeah, so Simon talked a little bit about his interest in sports management and sort of training. For me, actually, a big personal interest is twofold, which is, first of all, mindfulness on the one side, but also counseling and mental health on the other side. So I volunteer with an organization called Shout, which for any busy professionals looking to volunteer is a flexible one that is worth looking into. So because of that, I know very well that moods for any human being come and go. For sales, that's even more so, right? We are at the front line of growth. It is a hard profession to be in. I always tell my team that's why we get commission and other functions do not. And I think being at the front line of that growth carries with it great reward and great downside. And it's very hard, I think, to look after our mental health and the team's mental health as well through all of the highs and lows that sales involves.
Amazing. What about yourself, Simon?
Yeah, it's a really interesting angle that Jenny's got there. For me, it's more about the direct correlation between happiness, motivation, and sales performance. And I think, it's very apparent, of course, across many different business disciplines, but specifically in sales, we're asking the guys to sell our product to the world. It's as simple as that. If they're not performing at the top of their motivation levels, if they're really not feeling it, if they're not bouncing off the team, then actually the whole of the organization is impacted, and that suddenly affects everybody at the organization. So the reason I'm so interested in this today is to highlight that correlation, perhaps to discuss some of the techniques that we've used to sort of understand how we put happiness and motivation before performance, because I think ultimately happiness drives the performance.
Thank you. So for our listeners, just to give you a feel of the flow, what we're going to do is I'm going to present some of the methodology around how Freshworks and Harvard Business Review approach this. So you're going to get the insights via an infographic. Simon will then summarize this, and then we're leading some questions to give the viewer the experiences that Jenny and Simon have to give more context. What we'll do is we'll break out at the end for a Q&A, but do engage. It's very difficult to sit here without seeing your eyes, and the comments really do make a difference. So if you're at home and you agree or you disagree with a point, add it into the comments, because it helps us stay motivated and makes this a happier experience as well for us. And that's what we're trying to do, as well as having a happy experience, making it a great experience for yourselves. So when Freshworks seek to commission the Harvard Business Review, they were looking to understand kind of a couple of key areas. Number one was, how do happiness and culture impact performance, and by what level, by what degree? And what are the factors that positively and negatively impact your sales team? And now more than ever, that's really, really important to understand. So the methodology that was applied in this research, and by the way, you will get access to the full report next week. We've just extracted some of the highlights to make this a digestible, engaging session. So over 300 global sales leaders were interviewed and surveyed and asked to rate their sales team's happiness on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 to 7 being less happy, 7 to 10 being the very happy group. And we looked at 3 key areas that we're going to then extract some highlights and conversation around this afternoon. The first, sales team's happiness and its outcome on business metrics. The second, factors contributing to salesperson's happiness and their unhappiness. So understand what's actually impacting them. And then the crucial role that sales technology and the CRM and technology more broadly is playing in their happiness day to day. So one of the major findings, so this is our first major finding, was related to the sales team's happiness and its outcome on business metrics. And 81% of very happy groups reported increased in annual sales versus only 59% of less happy groups reported similar results. So we've got some of the highlights here around those sales success metrics and how they're more likely to increase with the very happy teams. Simon, have you got some kind of comments on some of the highlights that we've got here, please?
Well, I think the clear and obvious thing here is that it's not just about annual sales. Actually, happy sales teams are outperforming their less happy counterparts on basically every business metric there is. So hitting quota, sales team productivity, conversion rates, customer satisfaction, and many other leading indicators apparent within the sales organization. So the data seems very, very clear. So I think let's dig into some of these in a bit more detail. I think what I'd start by saying is motivation and performance go hand in hand. I think we know that. There's many theories around that. And if we just think of some of the main tasks, perhaps that we're asking the AEs and sales professionals to do, like researching companies, making calls, building relationships internally and externally, giving feedback, all of these activities would suffer if the motivation levels of that team member are low. And I think what we're trying to do here is to try and figure out how we get the motivation levels high to drive that additional performance and hopefully create what we keep talking about, which is this high performing sales team. And then, of course, again, if you multiply out that particular behavior that we might see from a low performing team across, I know at Freshworks, we have over 1,000 sales guys. So it's a huge potential loss to the organization if we can't get that parameter right. Additionally to that, pretty much all sales professionals now are on a variable compensation plan. If they're not completing these tasks really that they need to do to hit target, then ultimately they're not going to hit target. They're not going to make the money, and the motivation will decrease, which I think is what Jennie was talking about earlier. And we find ourselves in this spiral of we can't control what we're actually doing. And my point here is we need to turn this thinking on its head. We need to set the organization up to think happiness and motivation first to drive the rest of the performance. Everything else will follow. And I think at Freshworks, one of the main things that we look at here is how we structure our meetings and our strategies. And first is always people. Second is always process, and third is performance, in that particular order. And that's how we try and measure and try and work with our teams in that way.
So question then for Jennie, why do you feel a happy sales culture can lead to a high performing sales team? And how have you seen that play out from your own experiences of building out successful sales teams?
So for me, a big part of this links to kind of old school sales culture versus more progressive modern sales culture, right? So old school sales culture was very, very happy with a pack of lone wolves who, when left alone, would happily tear each other apart for the deal, right? And it was this culture that your gain is my loss, and we're in it and against each other to be top of that pack. That doesn't work, because what that means is most of your team's going to be losing. There's only one winner. That is not what you want to have. What I think works much better is a team that is focused not only on their own goals and their own objectives, but also the collective number and the collective outcomes that we are all working towards. And that shapes really different behavior, because what that means is you might have a good quarter, you might have a bad quarter, but through all of those highs and lows, you're celebrating and supporting the successes and victories and milestones and learnings across the team. And that is a really, really different sort of culture. And I think that gives you much more of the ability to wear those highs and lows and enjoy them and celebrate and come out the other end as well. So I think one of my team members that joined recently put it best. He said, I was really worried I might be joining a pack of sharks in a new sales team, but you guys are a bunch of smart dolphins, and I would love all of us to be smart dolphins.
Well, that's interesting. And that's that type of inclusive language that the report highlights later on in terms of being supportive while you may still compete. Simon, is there any other experience that you want to share before we move on to the next slide?
I think all I'd probably add is to what Jennie's saying, is that it does have to start from the top, and for somebody to feel like they can operate in that dolphin environment, they need to feel like they can operate with psychological safety. Ultimately, they're not going to get punished for not hitting target. And the kind of an effective way of doing that is to show that actually it's not just a revenue attainment that we care about here. It's actually your behaviors around the rest of the organization, your contributions to, to the general well-being of the organization. And I'll come and talk about that a little bit more later.
Brilliant. Thank you. So one of the areas we extracted information, and Simon, both Jennie just highlighted there, we're looking at the factors contributing to the salesperson's happiness versus their unhappiness. And, one of the major findings was leaders play an important role, a critical role. 89% of the very happy group agree that the sales team's happiness is a strategic priority for leadership. So the leader has set out the strategy and the plan with happiness top of mind. And something that I think would be nice to see in the debates is around the culture of code words. And one was already, brought out by Jennie recently about sales being sharks, and that kind of old school mentality, which has led to less happy sales cultures. Words like gold driven, work hard, play hard, particularly boiler room. It'd be good to see any comments if you've worked in some of those old school environments, any negative or toxic language even that you've seen that has led to a less happy experience for your sales organizations. It'd be good to see those in the comment. And also, that typical sales culture will work against that sales team's happiness, whereas supportive, social, transparent, a culture that actually works well together, where salespeople are supported by their leader and by each other, is much more effective. And therefore, leaders that make it a priority, they're investing in that happier sales team. So what more do we have to learn from this, Simon?
Well, I think ultimately, organizations need to have implemented, specific things to drive these kinds of behaviors. And I think we'll see here, things like expanded benefit offerings, for example, is something clear to set the environment right. People analytics, to talent management and talent selection is very, very key. Career development opportunities, how are you as an organization trying to develop and train and encourage new opportunities within the sales organization. Diversity, of course, is a huge topic, and that should always be considered. And of course, full inclusion and performance recognition. So there's many areas that happy teams should strive, or leaders should strive to develop for happy teams. And I'll just give an example actually with the expanded benefit offerings. This isn't something that should be looked at every 10 years. Let's say it should be constantly trying to figure out what is the best setup for our organization to prosper.
Great, thank you. So they talk about the report's findings talk about those sales leaders that have made it a strategic priority. So they're working with their broader leadership, and they're making it a priority with their strategy and planning. Jennie, you've joined an organization fairly recently. Is this something that you made a priority in your planning, in your strategy that you proposed as you're building out this sales team?
So, I think for me, a huge part of that, and something that's very important for us at Coursera, is culture, right? And I've had a lot of people say, what's culture? How do you define culture? One person put it really well, which is, if you want, especially when you're interviewing, don't ask other people alone how their experience was with that candidate. Ask the receptionist how that candidate treated that person, right? That's what you see. That's sort of the bones of culture. It's how you act when no one's looking. And we're very fortunate to have built a very strong culture here. And to me, as you talk about happiness, as you talk about sales performance, that is the bedrock. And no amount of benefits, no amount of, buzzwords on other topics will hide a weak culture. And to me, that is also, as you said, I think, Simon, as well, performance ebbs and flows. And I think there is a real need and a sort of almost mutual acceptance of that, right? You need to air that. You need to have that conversation so that people don't sit in fear and say, I'm not on ramp at month 5. What does that mean for my role in the business? I'm going to have a big miss this quarter. What does that mean? Have those conversations. Salespeople should not be living in fear. And again, in the current environment, that is only more true because, again, it's a rocky time for the world, right? And jobs are important to be keeping right now.
Yeah.
What would you add there, Simon?
Yeah, well, what I'd love to say is that it's absolutely a stated goal for us to drive happiness in the organization, but I don't think it is. But what I would say is there are many, many things that I've noticed that we consciously do that actually drive that performance. I think that's what's come out of the report for me. So, for example, we provide regular supportive one-to-ones to let people firstly how they want to develop, but also for us to give instant feedback and fast feedback. We're very transparent. It's important that as a leadership team, we're transparent. We can show the reports, we can show the numbers, but we're not throwing it in people's faces every single day. We want people to prosper and to drive their own performance as well. We offer budgets for celebrations, so we want to celebrate great performance, not just within the UK office, because that's very it's a walled celebration. Actually, we want to celebrate that across the organisation, and there's some really cool things that we do. Like so, for example, we use Facebook Workplace as our kind of central repository, and we have hashtags celebrating particular performance, and then we use those hashtags as a way of driving our cultural awards each month. And again, on the point around culture, it's really key. And we've gone from having I think like a 10-step culture outline down to a very simple 4-letter acronym, which is CHAT, and it stands for craftsmanship. And then actually the middle one is happy work environment. So we actually call out happy work environment as part of our culture, agility for empowerment, and being a true friend to the customer. And again, it sort of talks about these areas that we are wanting people to focus on. We want our staff to focus on that across the whole organization, not just sales. And then there's more as well. If you think about, the very basics, like offering a fair salary, these are really important to make sure that somebody's set up and ready to deliver their high performance, basically. So hopefully that gives some areas or some strategies that we focus on.
Something that I guess is curious though, how do you balance that we want to improve the happiness of our team, but you still need a performing team. You're in sales, you're target driven.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that expectation between someone that you've got an expectation and you're checking in and you're leading towards those positive motivators and happiness traits that you've talked about, versus the point you actually need them to perform for you?
So I think first and foremost, we have to be consistent. That's the very first point. So we can't suddenly be happy and jolly and then suddenly crash. We haven't hit target. Everything changes. We have to be consistent with what we're doing, and the way that we try and drive that consistency is through our OKR process. I'm sure many people also use OKRs, but it really has helped us to sort of facilitate a better strategy across the region. So objectives, key results, and that starts right at the very bottom. So actually what we do here is we get all of the feedback from the previous quarter, what's gone well, what hasn't gone well, win strategies, loss analysis, processes, technology, everything. We bubble it all the way up, we then categorize it, and we drive our OKRs through that. And every leader across Europe, actually across the globe now, including the CEO, has very specific, transparent OKRs, so that every member of the sales team can see, actually, these are the things we're trying to do to solve these issues that you've discussed with us. The additional thing I'd add there is that, and in terms of balancing, I always want to be seen as a servant leader, and that to me means that I'm always going to be available to go and roll my sleeves up, go on site, help the team, run discovery sessions, whatever I need to do to basically show that I'm part of what they're doing. I'm on the front line with the guys. And I think that's the way I try and balance, how they're feeling with how I'm feeling and how the organization is using OKLOS.
Fantastic. What about yourself, Jennie?
So a whole bunch of thoughts here. One actually links to the comment that Nick made there in the chat as well. So one thing that's really important is you might say, how on earth is a rep going to feel happy when they're not at quota or they're, tracking behind? And I think that's a really important point, because happiness, dare I say it, is elusive, right? Happiness is that moment of the good thing happening. No one lives in a constant state of happiness. And I would worry if we set an expectation that that is the objective for our teams, to be at that constant state, right? I have kids, that doesn't happen that way, either for me or my kids. But I think a much more noble thing in that sense to be talking about with our teams is equanimity. And I think the equanimity will ultimately make everyone happier. And what I mean by equanimity is that for better or for worse, despite the highs and lows that we are all experiencing, that we can maintain perspective, that we can maintain resilience, that we can maintain balance, because it's that resilience which is hugely, hugely important to a sustained career in a commercial organization. The other thing linked to the comment that Nick made as well is, if you look at the book Drive, again, success and role really boils down to purpose, autonomy, and mastery, right? And I think all of us as leaders constantly need to ask, are we enabling and empowering those things for our team? Micromanagement is something I hear time and time again as a pet peeve when I'm interviewing people and asking about former managers. So again, are we doing the things that people need to find purpose in their work, to be autonomous in their workflow, and again, to really have mastery within the product and solution that we're offering?
That's great.
It's amazing how that book resonated with so many people, isn't it? I mean, the book must be, I don't know, 15 years old, yeah. 20 years old, maybe, Dan Pink. Yeah, incredible.
Great. Thank you for sharing. So looking at the other area, the kind of final takeaway of the core topics was around the aspect of sales technology and CRM and teams happiness. I mean, this is definitely one of the go-to areas that sales individuals can complain. One of the things that came out of our annual conference that we noted in terms of the difference between the UK, Europe, and the US is, in the US, they typically have, for a salesperson, 7 to 8 tools or more at their disposal, and they need to work seamlessly together, versus 3 or 4 here in the UK. Now, from this report, 71% of all respondents agreed that poor sales tech can negatively impact the sales team. And I guess this just leads nicely to some of the services that you deliver, Simon, and that at the end of the day, the happy group reported positive CRM experiences versus the unhappy group that felt and were upset by the technology they had in their hands today.
Yeah.
I guess it's not good enough, not to have the right tools for a seamless day-to-day working practice.
Yeah, I mean, there's no surprises here, but there are many examples I could give of organizations and just evaluations that I've been part of where actually the end user hasn't been properly consulted, hasn't actually been part of the evaluation process, and that leads to many problems down the line, as you're aware. In fact, we've been using this term democratic design for quite a while now, and actually it started with IKEA, but we have a it's called Indian democratic design. It's a take on that, and it's all about designing your products from the ground up. So how do you design your product with the user in mind rather than the CTO in mind? I think that's really key. No matter whether you're selling into the enterprise, mid-market, commercial, or SMB business, it doesn't matter. The end user is essentially the same person. So first and foremost, it's key that the organization thinks about how can the sales professional really deliver what you want them to with the tools you give them. And there's a whole host of products, CRM, telephony, outreach products. I mean, there's hundreds of outreach products, marketing automation, sales nurturing, setting up the right TAM for each sales member. So there's a ton of different things. It's pretty obvious here. If you can't get that right, then the first place that the sales team is going to go is they're going to be angry. They're going to be frustrated.
Thank you for sharing. Thinking about how we summarize and some of the takeaways from this, leaving our listener and our viewers, thank you for staying with us around that focus of building out the happy and high performing sales team. Is there any recommendations for leaders in terms of how they approach this? Maybe they haven't had the support to actually approach designing this happy and high performing sales team. So is there any kind of advice on how they need to champion this internally or work with executives or just generally design this into their own planning and strategies? Jennie?
There's a lot in that question. So for me, I think a big part of it is, you look at us, you can see my house, my dog's in the background, all of the artifice of the way that we worked before is gone, right? People storm in and out rooms, kids are running through, all of those types of things. So I actually think it's a really good reset for us as leaders to be able to get real with our teams, very much as Simon alluded to as well, to be genuine servant leaders, to share the things that we are dealing with, to make sure we are hearing and giving people opportunity to share the things that they are struggling with as well, because a lot of those things may be outside of work, particularly right now, that are impacting performance. So again, I think we need to have a much more inclusive way in how we lead, and that in itself creates a much more open culture, which drives happiness, which drives accountability as well, and really intrinsic motivation.
Awesome. Simon?
I always I read a lot of sports books, and one particular the Alex Ferguson book always kind of rings true with me. He spoke about his leadership style. He'd said his job was essentially that come match day, he'd put the best possible prepared team out on the pitch, and then it's up to that team to then go and win the game. That was his kind of job done. So he fostered this super positive culture. He didn't have the best 11 players in the world or in every match, but they invariably won every match. And I think as an aspiring leader, we need to create that culture, that winning culture that means that your team are fully prepared to go out there and win, basically. And what do you need to do to make that happen? I think we've spoken about a lot of those areas today. So the next area is about your relationship with the team. Can you be seen as a servant leader? Are you going to go and make that effort with the team and not sort of hide back, turn your video off and not show yourself to your teammates essentially? Another good tip here is for any kind of aspiring leader is always learn what your senior sales peers are doing and networking peers are doing, and other team members and mentors, because that's how really you're gonna learn how things have or haven't worked. Take what has worked and then improve it if you possibly can with your own team. So try and regularly visit other team meetings, for example, or other offices, nationally or internationally, doesn't matter. And then maybe just a couple more. I always think about how do you magnify the success of your team? Like how do you take an example of a great behavior and then magnify that to the organization without blowing your own trumpet? That's a difficult thing to do and not recommended. But more look at this process, look how it's worked. How can we learn from it? Because that's a really positive message to your particular sales team.
Thank you. So we're just gonna summarize a couple of points, and then I'll ask you both just to have a parting thought. So maybe you can stew on that. What would your parting thought be to our listeners in terms of a recommendation or thought? And before we wrap up the main content and then head into some conversations, if you've got any questions for either Jennie or Simon now, do add those to the comments or any observations. Thank you for staying with us. So how to replicate the happy and high-performing sales culture. This has been highlighted a lot in this discussion, just being more social, transparent, and supportive. And we've been forced to do and be more empathetic because we're letting people into our worlds now in a way that we've never before. While there is competition around performance, avoid stack ranking and pitting people against the salespeople against each other. And obviously make sure you're empowering the team with the right setup, not just the right CRM. And the other point is, and Simon just mentioned this, magnify those wins. And I think also particularly those sales organizations where there are challenges or the sales cycle is being extended, think about those small wins as well as the big successes and as well as the big deal closes. make sure you're defining and building out your happiness priorities as part of your strategy and defining a clear sales process, and then coaching and developing. So we saw on some of those findings that at the top of how leaders are investing, making sure their sales teams are happy, is they're investing in learning and development. So all of this information, we're going to email out to you. You'll be able to watch this back, and also you'll get access to the full report. So if there's any questions, feel free to ping them below. So here's one from Chet. Would you advocate removing league tables?
I have mixed feelings on these. Coming into managing a team that did not have these at all, I think having a little bit of accountability on performance and visibility across that is a very healthy thing. And again, I think the thing is doing it in a periodic and appropriate way versus cutthroat, who's ahead this week, and that sort of, again, encouragement of lone wolves and sharking. So that it's kind of how you do it. Visibility versus driving behavior, I would say.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think we should all be aware that sales guys measure their own performance. So that's pretty obvious. I think as an organization, what we want to do here is create, again, that safety to be able to look at your performance and understand what has or hasn't worked for you, basically. We shouldn't try and make results invisible, but at the same time, we shouldn't beat somebody over the head with a league table, is what Jennie's saying. But absolutely, we should give people the right reports to see their performance. And actually, if they want to rate themselves and view themselves versus the rest of the organization, they should be able to do that, because chances are they'll probably be doing it in some way anyway. So we might as well make sure they're looking at the same report. Jennie, I'm just looking at your dog in the background. Just
for you, Simon.
I like how you kept it there, and you kept your children out.
I know who's louder.
So before we head to the networking, is there have you got a parting thought to share or comment, Jennie?
So I do. I think, part of what Simon's talking about there is self-awareness, right? Self-awareness for salespeople and self-awareness for us as leaders. And I think it's really important. You can't hide from the fact that sales is hard. It requires a very unique degree of tenacity, grit, and perseverance and resilience. And I think, for us as leaders, we can either encourage behavior that is essentially sitting in a boat, riding the waves of the storm, which is really exhausting, or strapping on a scuba suit, jumping under the waves. The storm and the waves are the same. You feel them very differently. And again, that is the perspective and equanimity that I think drives happiness. But ultimately, it's up to us as leaders to model that behavior. Because if all things, and fire set off when we do our Q3 forecast, we can say all that we want to, but we're not showing that behavior ourselves.
Fantastic. Simon?
Great. I have these images of scuba divers and dolphins now. It's great.
Got a nautical theme today, sorry.
Yeah. So I think I've just got 3 very quick points, actually. Firstly, I think the report hopefully will make you think about the way that you're managing your teams and the way that you're being managed, possibly. And it will give you some ideas about how you can potentially experiment to try and drive that motivation and that performance. That's the first thing. The second thing is something that we haven't really mentioned much, which is actually how is this affected during the time of COVID? The report was actually written prior COVID-19. And actually, the data is exactly the same, but actually our experiments and the way that we act are slightly different because of the given situation. So nothing really changes in terms of what we're saying. And the final thing is to say best of luck with the challenge of driving revenue, basically, and hopefully we can keep the conversation going and hear more about your successes and failures, maybe, where we can all learn to improve.
Thank you very much. It's been really thoughtful to hear some personal experiences layered around the kind of detail that was extracted from this particular report. One of the fantastic things about these events, and I said it when we kicked off, is that we're all getting used to the 4 walls, and maybe there's different rooms in our houses that we've started to operate in depending on moods, and we've all been very focused internally on our internal business now. So for the next half an hour, you can head to the networking area and have short one-to-one conversations and just make some connections. You know, maybe you're someone less experienced and you're aspiring to be a leader, and there's some leaders here that can give you some feedback. And also for leaders out there, it's always good to give back. You know, some of the essence of what Sales Confidence has been doing over the last 3 years has been getting leaders like Jennie, like Simon, and giving back to elevate this profession and give us more tools and confidence in how we operate. And I think that's why it's so important to make connections. So please do make the effort to spend the next 20 or so minutes and just say hi to some people you've never met, make a connection, learn something new. But in terms of the content, we're going to wrap that up. And I just want to thank Jennie and Simon, and I'm just going to add a round of applause. We can't hear everybody else. Thank you very much.
This is the remote clap.
We got it.
There we go.
And if I could, just as one last thing as well to add on Coursera, just so folks know, we've got some pretty big hiring plans through end of year. So do feel free, if you know folks within your network that are looking for the next either commercial, customer success, things like that, do feel free to follow us and suggest that your friends do too.
Perfect. All right, let's head over to the networking. Let's have some fun. Cheers all.